Hey guys, we know this is going to be a long podcast, but it's a positive conversation. And for you to listen to both parts, listen to part 1 here on Can I Kick It FC and part 2 on
Soccer 101, Total Soccer Show's other podcast. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts.
So, as always, be easy, guys. I hope you enjoy the show. And with that being said, here's the intro music. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to this week's episode of Can I Kick It? I was about to say River City 93 again. For everyone that knows, I have more podcasts that I can count on one hand. But welcome to Can I Kick It? This is the 30 for 30 for Black Soccer. I am kind of nervous because I'm recording this in a professional, in a professional setting. And that voice you heard is that of my good friend, Mr. Taylor Rockwell. How are you doing, sir?
I'm all right. I mean, I'm also nervous because we're about to talk about racism and institutionalized racism, which I'm not sure I'm an expert to speak on, but I also don't want to put my foot in my mouth. So a little bit apprehensive going in, I'm not going to lie.
So if you don't know Taylor, Taylor is the wonderful voice behind the Total Soccer Show. And the reason why I asked him to come on the show is because Taylor's podcast is one of the few podcasts I know that aren't afraid of touching on these topics when they do happen. So Taylor, I reached out to you, and I'm pretty sure you don't mind, but we had a whole conversation. You expressed to me that you didn't feel comfortable talking about this because you were like, I don't know if I'm the right voice for this.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. It's mostly just that, like, I, as a straight white dude, I'm like, I've never experienced racism, so I can talk about it, but I'm talking about it and not talking about the experience of it a little bit. And so I also don't know, like, if the world needs another straight white dude's opinion on a thing that they're not really that well versed in, but I'm happy to talk about it as best I can.
Yes, and that's all fair. And like I told you, was like, yes, your opinion does count in this because of the fact of when we talk about being an ally, we're talking about, like, you speaking out against it. And what we've seen with the Romelu Lukaku incident, with and for instance, Napoli today won the league. And one of the famous still shot photos that people are talking about on Twitter is about how the Confederate flag is showing up there and how, yes.
Yeah, that's always a tough one. Like, I think it's Olympiacos always have that in the background of their games, and it's just a weird, like, maybe y'all just like it because it's an image, but if you know the history behind it, it's the same thing as seeing a Confederate flag in, like, Connecticut or New York, which you will see a lot of, and it's just sort of like, y'all are real racist if you're flying that in New York.
Right. Like, you're strong in that.
Yeah. You're telling me some things without telling me some things, I feel like.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, it's a black guy and a white guy talking about it, but I think, like, the conversation we're going to have is one that is going to be very positive about, like, what are the leagues doing? Why are leagues afraid to address racism? What are some things that, for fans, for leagues, they can do that we would like to see improved upon? And then kind of have that general conversation. Also, I got to remind myself, but I'm also reminding you fans, halfway through this podcast, you will hear a snippet. Well, not a snippet. You will hear from Mr. Brandon Miller, who is the executive president of the United Black Players Association, and I interview him as well. So you're hearing different points of this. So, yeah. Taylor, I think we should just go ahead and get started in this, man.
All right. Sounds good. And thank you for saying nice things about me and the podcast. I appreciate that because we've known each other for a long while now, it feels like.
Yeah.
Since I moved back to Richmond. So, what, 2016 or thereabouts, maybe?
I think so.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope that friendship continues. We'll see how it goes tonight.
We'll see. I'm pretty sure it will. But yeah, man. I mean, let's go ahead and get into it.
So you voted for Donald Trump, right? I want to get that out of the way.
No,
right
definitely not. Definitely not.
All right, cool. Same page. We're good. All right, we can keep going then.
So pretty much what we have is we did the research. We looked at the 5 big leagues in Europe. So Premier League, Serie A, La Liga, Ligue 1, and the Bundesliga. Then we also looked at MLS and USL. So the backstory behind this is this all pretty much came about, and I reached out to you because of what happened between the New York Red Bulls and I believe it was the San Jose Earthquakes.
You got it.
So, and then on top of that, Romelu Lukaku and Inter Milan and Juve. And we wanted to see like how the leagues pretty much carry on racism.
Mm-hmm.
So starting off with the Premier League, they pretty much are. I don't want to say the flag carriers in Europe when it comes to racism, but they're probably the most out there in your face about it with the no to racism. They took the knee during the pandemic. Multiple players have called it out, but you're still seeing, in my opinion, not enough done. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think it's going to be the same for pretty much every league we talk about.
Yeah.
I think leagues themselves on the whole can do a lot of PR. They can do a lot of public statements. They can do a lot of the kind of text that we have in front of us. But I also think they can't do a ton to really like stamp it out. They're not going to go into the stands and regulate. I don't think they're ever going to make clubs play behind closed doors. So I think there's a lot of campaign and a lot of publicity and a lot of public facing stuff at the same time. I mean, it's happened since the 80s and before that, but like Robbie Earle had a whole thing a couple seasons ago about Raheem Sterling getting racially abused when he was playing for City by Chelsea fans. I kind of forgot about that until like today, and then realizing like, and then he played for Chelsea. That's weird. And so I think it's a thing that exists in pretty much every league, and I think lots of different clubs have had to deal with it. So I think the Premier League tries, and there's a lot of good branding and good talking points about it, but it still persists because it still persists in society.
I will say this: they probably have the best branding of anyone that I've seen. But it's also, we're talking about the Premier League, which is like the NFL of soccer.
Yeah.
So they can throw money at this. I mean, so this is an interesting quote that I found from Mr. Richard Masters, who is the chief executive. Which, by the way, did not know the Premier League had a chief executive.
Yeah, I'm not sure I did either. I just felt like it was just this, like, I assumed they had some like computer that just made decisions for them. I didn't realize it was one dude in
assumed
charge.
it was the FA that was just like, all right, we got the Premier League. Y'all do that.
No, they broke away. They're like, no, we want to do our own thing. We'll give you a tiny bit of money and we're going to keep the rest.
Yeah, didn't realize that. So this is what he said. He said, fighting racism and all forms of discrimination is always a priority for the Premier League and other clubs. We urge everyone to play their part and demonstrate that racial prejudice is not acceptable in football wider societies. So that alone is a good quote. But then when we come to the application of that, it feels like it kind of falls short.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, does that quote, like again, this is the difference in perspective. Like, does that quote actually mean anything to you? Like, it's good that the chief executive is saying that for sure, but I guess my assumption has always been that they can say all that stuff, but it doesn't really carry weight unless there's action behind it and actual action taken. And so that's where I feel like sometimes it's just sort of they say the right things because that's what they have to do publicly, and then on we go with it kind of being the same thing.
Yeah, that's what 100% it feels. It feels like 100% lip service. Like, hey, this is what we're trying to do, but when it comes to really doing it, we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and I do think, to your point, like the Premier League is probably the one that attempts to do the most with it. I think they're aware that they probably have the most global audience on every continent and lots of different supporters in lots of different places. And so I think there's maybe in trying to appeal to that global audience, I think there's probably more willingness to have these types of campaigns versus maybe, say, Serie A, where I think there's more of a we don't want to piss off the ultras, so we're going to say some things, and then even when we say things, still be like, but, like, is racism that bad? In the middle of saying, like, racism is real bad. I think Serie A has some mixed messages.
Oh, man. Okay, perfect segue. Let's go ahead and talk about Serie A, because I was ready to bring them up. So, for Serie A, this is the quote-unquote suspension for Serie A.
Serie A's statement is basically like, look, we have black friends, all right? So, like, we're not racist as a league. And then also, like, turning a blind eye to overt racism. Yeah.
So, it says it's doubles the minimum ban for a player guilty of racial abuse and an opponent from 5 to 10 games. It made a partial stadium closure the minimum penalty for clubs whose fans were guilty for making discriminatory change. Now, in that statement, there has been proven record of discriminatory change.
Oh, yeah.
There has been proven record of fans being guilty. I remember, what was it? It was Mario Balotelli. I think he was playing for Brescia at the time, and it was against Hellas Verona. And the ultras came out and said, like, yeah, we called him a monkey.
Oh, yeah. Lukaku, too.
Yeah. And they were just, and the Serie A was just like,
Yeah. Well, so it's a weird thing. Like I kind of tend to believe that whenever you put something down in writing like that, you are. I mean, it's good. At the same time, you're also sort of spelling out the loopholes of how you're not going to enforce it. And so right there, when they say, like, when they're guilty of making discriminatory chants. So first of all, they've got to be found guilty.
Yeah.
It doesn't really say who's going to find them guilty.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's the Federation. But then also the discriminatory chants thing, there's the idea of who defines discriminatory. Because when it was Lukaku, I forget who they were racially abusing, but it was Inter Ultras like doing monkey chants, and I think like they threw bananas at a black player on the opposition team. And Lukaku was very upset about that, publicly spoke about it, and got a letter from the Ultras that basically said, like, you have to understand, this isn't racism. We're just trying to get in their heads. We're just trying to mess with them. And it's not racist at all. We just know that saying racist stuff upsets them. And it's like, well, you're splitting hairs here. That's racism. But like, I think in that way, ultras are going to say like, no, we're not being racist. We're just trying to like mess with a player so he doesn't play well. So that's not racism. So we're not being discriminatory. So it's fine.
Like punching somebody in the face and being like, I didn't punch you. Your face hit my fist.
I mean, your face shouldn't have been there if you don't want to get punched. Like it does feel like there is a lot of sort of that loophole or just a willingness to kind of look the other way, get out of it a little bit. And sometimes action is taken, but I can't remember, this is me being ignorant, but I can't remember a time that a game was like suspended or fans weren't allowed into a stadium. If anything, I feel like players continue to be punished for walking off the pitch and taking action when they're racially abused.
I mean, the famous moment I can think of, I think it was Moises Kean when he played at Juventus. Mm-hmm. And who's the center back that was at Juve?
Would it be Chiellini or Bonucci?
Bonucci. I remember, it was Bonucci. Bonucci spoke out.
Oh, yeah, this is it. Yeah, exactly.
Bonucci spoke out and was just like, Moise Kean can't allow that to affect him. And it's like, dude, like, he's going to... Moise Kean at this time was 18.
Yep.
Just scored a huge important goal for Juve. And he's going to call a monkey, get a bananas thrown at him. And he literally just stood there and put his fingers in his ear. Mm-hmm. And... instead of Bonucci being the leader, this is where I lost a lot of respect for Bonucci. Mm-hmm. Instead of being a leader, he kind of just like blamed Keane for the moment. It's like, what?
Yeah, no, I think that is I think it's kind of the same thing with a lot of these leagues and a lot of the owners and the decision makers. I think there is an assumption that they understand. Hey, I'm not a racist. Like, I would never say a racist thing, but at the same time, maybe a lack of awareness of how. There's a difference between being overtly racist, like wearing a Klan robe, and having racist thoughts or prejudice thoughts that you don't realize you have or you don't realize are prejudice. And I think that's Bonucci right there, is that he's saying like, hey, fans are going to say, they say stuff to me all the time. They call me bald. They say I'm dumb. And it's like, that's not the same thing. Yeah. Like you can't. And I think sometimes there's a false equivalency put on stuff by people who don't know. That's the thing that I'm always kind of mindful of am I saying a thing that I don't realize has racist overtones or racist connections or things like that? Because I think like one time I said like nitty gritty. I think somebody told me was like what was left in slave ships after like the slaves were taken off, and it was like that's what they called the detritus left behind. And it's just like certainly you can go down a road of like everything has racist connotations in the United States if if you want to really look into it. But there's stuff that's more overtly there that I think people don't always deal with or sort of consider when they're saying stuff like Bonucci said. And so I think that's where you get a lot of the like, look, just get over it. Like it wasn't a big deal. They didn't mean it. They're just trying to get in your head, whatever it may be. I think that's how some stuff gets explained away.
Yeah. Even on that point, I think, like you just said, like you try to figure out like everything has a racist connotation to it. I think even at that point, you have to just realize like words have meaning, but you have to, I think if you're always trying to figure out like, am I in the right place? Like I think there's right in your heart.
Yeah, I think intentionality is a big part of
it
for sure.
There we
like,
go. Intentionality.
Is like what your intention is, but then I think with that is also, in my experiences, talking to family
Welcome
members.
to the therapist chair.
No, man, it's good. It's good. It's because I think it's an interesting conversation, and it's one that I feel like some people don't get to have. Yeah. But like, I think for me, in talking to some family members who I would say do have maybe more prejudice, there is a feeling of like I'm like my grandparents were racist. I'm not a racist, but then also there isn't that willingness to examine your own actions and your own thoughts and be like, oh wow, I didn't realize that was upsetting. Because there may be a time that I like say something that I don't realize is insensitive to you, and to me, I didn't mean anything by it. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but doesn't matter. I still hurt your feelings, and you still have the right to say, like, hey, man, that was messed up. Don't say that. And then it's on me to, like, process that, accept that, apologize, move on. And I think that's the other thing that doesn't happen so often is people don't really want to have to examine their own actions and be like, oh, that's not good. And so it's easier to just head in the sand and be like, nah, that wasn't racist. It's just they're getting in your head. Don't worry about it. And so that's the other part of it, I think, that you got to kind of factor in.
So I think overall, I think it's fair to say that, like, Syria probably does the worst when it comes to race relations. We're talking about a league that did a monkey campaign thinking that was all racism.
That's when you're hiring an artist. Like you sent that article. When you hire an artist who's like known for his thing is putting monkeys into the artwork. Again, it's maybe not intentional, but there's a like that's how you're saying no to racism. Like I wouldn't maybe go with that one. That's not the imagery I would go for.
Right, honestly. So we're gonna move from Syria to a league that probably, in my opinion. Not saying anyone does a great job at dealing with it, but probably I think the Bundesliga probably does the best job of empowering its league and its teams to combat racism. And I think they probably do the best when it comes to like enforcing it, I would say.
I think so. We went over there a few years ago, and the DFL, the league, or like the organization that oversees the leagues, did a whole presentation on like the history of racism in various clubs and what they've done to combat it. And I think like I sort of went in thinking like, no, the Bundesliga 50+1, even though we're talking about Germany, that they've like learned from past mistakes and that there's less of that there. And I think it was a good reminder that like it's everywhere. Racism exists everywhere, and you're going to have some clubs that are maybe more right wing or more like inclined to have right-wing politics behind them, and so there have definitely been sustained campaigns to either combat that or have fans banned for life or take action against supporters groups, I think, and still a ways to go, but I agree with you. I think the Bundesliga has been pretty proactive in that regard.
Yeah, I remember I had a good conversation with my friend Jake, who, if you don't know, does 50+ Derna, which covers Germany. He's a black German. He loves the Bundesliga and whatnot, but we had a conversation about, like, in Germany, I think it's probably the best. Like you said, is that difference of like clubs. Like you have clubs that are very left wing, like Borussia Dortmund,
FC St. Pauli is the big one. Yeah,
Borussia St. Pauli, and then you have clubs that are very right wing, like God, what's the famous one?
I think Hamburg has sort of like conservative leanings, but Hansa Rostock is the one.
Yeah, Hansa Rostock and Domino Dresden.
That's the club of the KGB.
Yeah,
they got their own stuff.
Yeah. But he was just letting me know of like, you know, even though you have this stuff going on with the leagues, like you have clubs like Bayern where they're like Reds against racism. Like the clubs are trying to do their best to combat the racism and trying to fight against it. They know they can't snuff it all out, but they're not making vague statements either, which I appreciate.
Yeah, I think it's still really interesting because like not too long ago you would hear that like when people were previewing the World Cup, you would hear like the Germans look like Germany, like or the German national team, they look like what you would expect them to be, because there was a time when it was all like big Aryan-looking white dudes. And it is interesting to see how the German national team has become so much more multicultural. There's a huge Turkish diaspora population there. And that has been, I think, a pretty sizable source of conflict throughout the years. Like I know older Germans who have said, like, oh, I never go to the Turkish part of the city. It's the messy part. It's the disorganized part. And there's still that sort of bias there that I think is, again, ingrained in society. But I do feel like there is more overt work done by at least some Bundesliga clubs. And FC St. Pauli does a very good job of it because they are ultra left-wing. Yeah.
So it wouldn't surprise you that I got in trouble on Twitter because I called out, like, how some U.S. media treats black players.
No, it would not. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that you got in trouble on Twitter for any number of things that you tweet, but no. I mean, so what did you say?
So pretty much I said that, you know, pretty much talk about like how USMNT Twitter will treat black players when they're doing great or how we want to recruit them. But the moment they do something wrong, they're very, I would say, more critical than they normally are to other players.
Yeah.
Right? So just like how you talk about with Germany, right? Germany wins the World Cup. The face of that team is Mario Götze, Ozil, whatnot. they go through a slightly down period, but all the negativity you see is Rudiger, Gnabry, and other black Germans.
And then you get like the dog whistle of like, do they understand what it is to be German? Are they truly like representative of the national team? And there is that sort of like, what do you mean by that? Right. Like, because I feel like you're trying to say it as like they're young, but I feel like you mean other things when you say those types of things. Yeah. And like Karim Benzema said the same thing. Did I already say that one? That's like the famous one.
That's a very famous. I think he even came out this year and said like, Karim Benzema is a very interesting case because I really feel like if he could go back in time, I really feel like he would have chose to represent Algeria instead of France.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think he's got an interesting career. The whole blackmail case I've never fully
Which
understood.
is still hilarious to me.
It's a weird thing. He's an interesting dude for sure, but that line is what, like, when I score, I'm French, and when I have a bad game, I'm an Algerian immigrant. Yeah. Like, yeah, I think, so that's to what you're saying. Yeah. That does seem to be a thing that, like, not just you, but I think plenty of black athletes in the U.S. and on the soccer side have felt. Like, Josie Altidore, I think, has been pretty public about his feelings that the media tends to be pretty critical of black athletes, especially if they're eligible for the USMNT or likely to play for the USMNT. And I think that there's a sentiment that there's like a lack of empathy when it comes to how we talk about players, especially black players in this country.
And this was an interesting segment that I found. So 80% of sports media in this country is white.
Yep.
White male. So especially in soccer, where that number rises to 95%. Like, that's insane. Especially when, and I understand, like you were just saying, about like how we talk about players and how that coverage is covered. It can very much turn from like criticism of how they do on the field to very much like, do they understand what it means to be American? Do they understand what it means to be Mexican? Do they, things like that. I think a lot of the times we have to be understanding of the fact of like, you shouldn't be questioning someone's nationality for a team.
Yeah, I mean, even the German American, the dual national like debate that I feel like has calmed down because we have so many dual nationals. But there was that time when it was like, are they really? Yeah, I think it was that Klinsmann or Bruce Arena, I forget, where it was like, are they truly Americans? Should they truly be representing the national team? Do they understand what it means? And it's just like I
will never forget the hysteria around what's his name, Jonathan Gomez.
Oh, Gonzalez.
Gonzalez.
Yeah.
I will never forget the hysteria around that when he chose to play for Mexico.
Yeah.
It went from the day before, everyone was in love with him. Everyone was like, oh, he's going to be one of the best midfielders, to the day he said, I'm going to play for Mexico. And then it turned into, oh, he's crap. He don't understand what to be an American. And I'm like,
that's interesting, because I think my experience of that was more so U.S. fans being terrified that they had lost out on this guy, and there was the stories about U.S. not recruiting him. And I mean, that is its own issue, that you don't really have much Latino representation, or as much as you probably should for a country like this. And I mean, that came up when Crocker, the new GM of the men's program, was talking about like when he was hired, he didn't really. I think one of the questions was about how he plans to incorporate more Latinos into the program and more Spanish speaking, and he was basically like, "Yeah, I don't really know. I'm gonna have to look into that. Like, I haven't really thought about it." And I think there was a pretty strong reaction of like, "You haven't thought about that, and you're gonna be the head of the men's side of the program?" Like, so I think there is a good long ways to go, and I mean that is reflected in my show as well. I mean, it's now four guys, and it's all four dudes who are all white, and it's a thing that I'm mindful of and would like to do better about. I think because I know those numbers are pretty skewed, as you said, and I think it's also a thing that's kind of hard to, I don't know, to find a solution to, other than just like give more people opportunities, which. Like, I would love to give more people opportunities when it comes to like especially women's soccer. I think what is it, Shea Butter and Diaspora? Like they're both great, and I think people should listen to them. And I want to have them on the show this summer when it comes to the Women's World Cup. But I mean, that's just like a tiny little step. I think there's probably a lot more that could be done and should be done.
And we'll get back to the league, but I think this is like a important part of like I think like that of like you recognize like, yo, I can do more. And I think that's an important thing that a lot of allies and white counterparts sometimes they get kind of like stuck in that part of like, I don't like, they don't want to be put as the forefront of like race tension or race relations or anything like that. But I think it's that part of like, yo, I want to invite them on the show, or I want to open up this gate for them to have this conversation. Because my podcast, for instance, like Can I Kick It was doing well, but it wasn't until 2020 when you and Daryl hit me up and was like, yo, we want to interview you. And then from there, it opened up another avenue for my podcast to go to. Because my show can only grow but so much. But it's when you get into those main lanes of like, I hate to say it, like Alexi Law. Like Alexi Lawless hit us up. Or, God, like Taylor Twellman. We tweeted something that we did. It opens up a different avenue because there's a different base.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, that does. And I think that's probably like the easy little things that people could do more of, and read more from different people and follow more people on Twitter if you want to stay on Twitter.
Follow the right people.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The right wing people is what you're talking about, right? Yeah, you want to follow them? Elliot Barr, follow the right wing.
Disregard the For You page. Go to the page that's strictly the people you follow. That For You page will get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, stay away from that. But like, I think then the again, we're going to the therapy chair. The thing that I'm also mindful of, though, like I've had this experience a lot with Steph Young from The Athletic and Meg Linehan, too. Like, there was a period of time, and it's, again, representative of U.S. soccer, that there were just so many scandals, abuse scandals, sexual harassment scandals, the unequal pay issue, all of those. Like, I kept having them on to discuss. It was just, like, constantly depressing, serious topics. And I think there is also, for me at least, an awareness that like it's you can have a person of color on to talk about anything. It doesn't just have to be race relations. And I think that's a thing that I also like think I try to be mindful of, at least, is not just having people on to be like, so Elliot, you're a black man, tell me about the black experience in this country. Just summarize it real quick, but being like, how was your day? Like, I don't know. So I think that's the other thing that, like, on a basic level, people can probably do a little bit more of, is not be like, Elliot, tell me about the plight of black people in America, if you could. Just real quick. I know it's a really lighthearted topic. Just, if you don't mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, honestly, like that, those little things like that, man. It really goes a long way, more than what people realize because they think like, oh, I gotta find a black person on the show, I have to really talk about race. Like, no, like you can have those conversations. Like, I look at it like this. Like, as easy it is for you to talk about soccer, yes, it's okay for you to reference your black friend, but don't make your black friend the go-to person only on race relations.
Yes, my one black friend has some thoughts, and I'm going to share them now. Your white friend sitting across the table is now reminding you that you have to take a break.
Oh, that's right. So we're going to take a break right now, and you're going to hear from Mr. Brandon Miller from the U.S. United Soccer Black Players Association. There we go. I got it out. We had a short conversation on how are they dealing with racism? How are leagues dealing with racism from his standpoint? So on the other side of this, me and Taylor's going to finish talking about the leagues and have a great conversation.
There you go.
All right. What's going on, everyone? Joining me on the show today is Mr. Brad Miller. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. So for everyone who doesn't know, you are a former player of the Charlotte Independence, but currently right now you are still in part with the USL BPA, correct?
Yeah, we changed our name to the United Black Players a few months ago. So I just did a little rebrand, but yeah, I'm the executive director there. We still have a number of initiatives that we're working with the USL and a number of different clubs within the USL to kind of fulfill some of those initiatives and push those along and kind of spread those out around the league to more teams and to the front office as well. So still doing a lot of that work.
Yeah. And it's been exactly what, I think 2, maybe 3 years since we last had you and Hugh on the podcast talking about like the creation of the United Black Players group. Like, in your 3 years, man, how have you seen this group like grown? How has the league dealt with racism? Things like that.
In terms of our group, the growth has been pretty interesting. I mean, we started out kind of just emotionally, like everyone was so emotionally charged at the time in the environment around the United States, both on and off the soccer field. Like, there was a lot of racial tension and people were just, wanting to get involved and figuring out how they can get involved. And so, our group formed basically off a connection of Black players around the league and saying, hey, we need to step up. We want to do something. And we've evolved from that into a group that's got a much more distinct and directive plan and ideas about what we want to create, what we want to put forward, the initiatives that we want to to continue to push forward, and the impact that we want to make in every individual market and league wide. And so I think we've just gotten much more focused on what exactly it is we want to do. We've narrowed in, because before, when we started, it was kind of like we just want to make an impact, but we weren't really specific about where and how and what specifically we want to do. And so now, looking at it 3 years on, we've got a clear plan. You can see that on our website. That talks about the different initiatives that we want to do and the player pathway that we have that's impacting youth soccer, college soccer, professional soccer. So we just got more specific about what we want to do, and our focus is very clear. And we've been able to convey that to the league, and we've been able to convey that to multiple clubs who want to be involved as well. But in terms of talking about specifically the USL and how leagues address racial issues, I think there's still a gap. There's still a gap in understanding of what the response looks like. Myself personally, I've been involved in some of these situations in terms of how they've been handled, and there's still difficult situations, especially in the USL, because it's not like MLS where there's mics and cameras everywhere and pretty much everything gets caught. It's kind of turns into a he said type of situation. And you saw that last year with Tampa and Monterrey. And I think that there's still a lack of understanding at the higher levels, the executive levels, the people who are handling these incidents at the club level and at the league level, lack of understanding of what the impact is of these racial situations and what the impact is of the decisions that are made from these racial situations. We saw it last year when the league kind of rushed their decision on the Tampa Monterrey situation and then walked it back. The impacts of that are far reaching. And those are conversations that I've had. The way you look at a club like Tampa Bay and how they handled the situation, how they initially responded to the situation, like they're a flag bearer of this league. One of the standard clubs in this league, and the way they respond to things is the way that a lot of clubs are going to respond to things. Like, if Tampa Bay Rowdies are doing it, that's how we're going to do it. And the same thing at the league level. If the league is responding in certain ways, right, that trickles down to their club. So if they're not putting an emphasis on stamping out racism, addressing these situations in the right way, putting it through the proper process, then clubs aren't going to be doing the same thing as well. So I think it's putting a lot of onus on the higher ups, on the league, and on the leaders of these clubs to actually take these situations seriously. And I just don't think they're at that point quite yet.
Yeah. So I mean, between 2021 and 2022, we saw a lot of leagues like MLS say that zero tolerance towards racism. Like, we know what that looks like on paper. For you, how does that actually look like in terms of a realistic plan of saying we're being zero tolerance towards racism? Or is that realistic in a sense?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's after the New York Red Bull situation, I wrote an entire blog post, had like a 10-minute blog post ready.
And this led to me reaching out to you as you come on the show.
I was 5 seconds away from posting it, and my partner said, pump your brakes, maybe take a little time and think about it. Because and I've had this conversation a number of times over the past couple of weeks. What does zero tolerance mean? And that's the issue. The ambiguity there is the issue with a lot of leagues and a lot of clubs. They say that they have zero tolerance for it, but they don't describe what that means. They're not in depth about. Zero tolerance means, hey, if a racial incident happens, you won't be working for this club. You won't be working for this league, right? But that there's no clarity there, right? So zero tolerance for some people means a 6-game suspension. Zero tolerance for other people means you shouldn't be in this league. And I had that conversation again with an executive in the league last year, because the statement was, this is an unprecedented response to racism. This is unprecedented suspension. And my question to that was, well, what is the precedent for racism? What is the precedent for stamping racism out of the game? Is it a 6-game suspension? Is it an 8-game suspension? Is it a $5,000 fine? Like, what is the precedent? If we're not willing to do unprecedented things to stamp out racism, then we're not really that worried about racism. It's something that we can tolerate, but only so much, right? So it's like zero tolerance is such a vague statement, and that's the issue with a lot of the leagues and a lot of the clubs. You have the vague statements of zero tolerance or no discriminatory language. What does that mean? people are so afraid to actually outline it. What does it mean? You look at the Red Bull situation where the player apparently, used the phrase monkey, and that's acceptable over in his country. So apparently, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's acceptable over in another country. It doesn't matter what's acceptable in another culture. When you sign a contract to play in MLS, when you sign a contract to play in the USL, there should be clear guidelines of what's acceptable in that culture, in the USL culture, in the MLS culture. And once you sign that contract, then you have a clear understanding of, these are the lines that I can't cross. And when I cross those lines, zero tolerance means X, Y, and Z. And if you haven't outlined that, then you're not really addressing racism. You are putting on marketing for the fans and for the masses.
Do you think it seems like a lot of clubs get the two confused, of marketing to what what the fans want, but also like sticking by these hard lines? If you're looking across the board from all the top 5 leagues to MLS to USL to whatever, like, how do we start getting clubs to not only look at it in terms of marketing, but actually putting like real force behind these legislations?
Well, it's, you look at what MLS, what USL are, they're businesses, right? So the problem is there's not an ROI on DE&I initiatives. There's not an ROI on diversity. So you can do your best to quantify it, but they don't see a clear impact on the bottom line when they're addressing racism or putting policies in place that create equitable environments and inclusive environments. Like, they're not seeing an ROI. And so that's the focus of many team owners. That's the focus of many team presidents, because that's their job. And so that's the issue, is balancing those and understanding that. That's one of the big reasons why I recently I did a case study with Vermont Green, the USL League 2, and we literally worked on this for a year, trying to show how a club can both put emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion within their club, within their community, and how that impacts their bottom line, how that impacts the number of fans that they have at their club, how that impacts the relationships that they have with individual community members and different organizations within the community. Like, what does that look like for a club from an environment and culture perspective, but also from a bottom line perspective, from the dollars and cents of it. And so, we worked on that for a year, and I think it was really impactful case study, because it shows that a club, while it's a League 2 club and financials are totally different than, say, a League 1 or a championship club, like, it is possible. You just have to put an emphasis on it. You have to be intentional about it. And there's not very many clubs that are intentional. I'm not going to say no clubs are intentional. There are some clubs out there that are very intentional about what they're doing and walk within their purpose and literally make decisions every day that are within their values. But if you're not intentional about being an anti-racist club, then a lot of it is just marketing. And to that point as well, like, what you have to understand about this work is, like, some of it is marketing, some of it is getting people to care, right? And being able to convey the right message so that people can get locked in and can understand, hey, this is what we're trying to do from a marketing perspective. And now we have to put that into action, and it's intentional action. It's intentional every single day, every single week, every single month. And that's the problem. It's like clubs get and they're businesses, right? They have so many things going on, but they get so distracted by the next event or the next holiday that's coming up that they have to address. That, Black History Month was 3 months ago. So that's not the focus anymore. Juneteenth's coming up, we'll hit that. But then beyond that, like, we've got to focus on what happens in July, August, September. And that doesn't often include focusing on work that's going to improve the diversity, equity, and inclusive nature of your club.
Is it fair to give these clubs and leagues a grace period, saying as if, like, like you just said, like, some of these clubs are overstretched, they're trying their best? Is it fair to give them a grace period of trying to understand this new push of dealing with racism and being, like we said, quote unquote, zero tolerance about it?
Yeah, I guess I'll throw it back to you in what exactly you mean by a grace period, because I think, like, the work that we do with Anti-Racist Soccer Club and some of the work that I'm doing right now with Soccer Without Borders and the Switch the Pitch program, like, our main thing is that we want to meet clubs and we want to meet individuals where they're at and move forward, right? So it's not so much, hey, you're not doing this right now, so you're a bad club. It's like, hey, here's where you're at, and here's where we want to take you, and let's put together the steps to get you there if that's truly where you want to be. And so I think, like, there's a grace period there. It's like, if we start our work today, I have to understand that over this next year, you may not hit every single goal, but you're going to start to move forward in that work and start to put the policies in place and the practices in place that are going to help to make your environment more inclusive and start to address these situations and prevent these situations. That's really the goal. Is like, it's not so much just addressing them. It's like, we don't want to have these situations in the first place. So in order to prevent those situations, we have to start to create environments that are more inclusive, more understanding, more empathetic, and are very clear about what is acceptable and what's not. So if we're talking about, like, in terms of grace period, that's what I immediately think of when I say grace period, but maybe I got that wrong.
No, you do. You're on point with it. The last question I want to ask you is kind of like two parts. When you first came on the show 3 years ago, I asked you, like, what is the 5-year goal? What is the 5-year plan of United Black soccer players? You're kind of in that middle mark now of the 5-year plan. Like, how do you see the next 2 years in this organization going forward? And lastly, what do you expect leagues and clubs to do to have a true impact of curtailing racism out of the game?
Okay. All right. I'm gonna see if my memory is good. So over the next 2 years, like, we are right in that middle era of the organization, and I think we're in a good place. I think that we have a very clear vision moving forward. I think the big thing for us now is finding some long-term partners that want to come along with us. We look at some of the league partners like Puma, and they've got their own initiatives around DE&I and anti-racism. And I think we would love to be a part of some of that stuff and be able to partner with organizations like Puma long term to get some of the funding that we need to make a lot of our programs larger. Partnering with Quick Goal to continue to give out coaching subsidy scholarships for these players that want to get their coaching licenses and want to reach higher levels as coaches. That's one of the biggest issues in the USL, is the lack of diversity at the head coaching position. We want to be able to address that. So I think the biggest thing is just finding consistent long-term partners for us that will continue to help us make the impact. The league's been good about bringing us Bellevue, and we've been working with the league and with Bellevue to give out full scholarships, and that has been incredible. And we've been able to impact a number of lives, and we're going to continue to do that. And we want to continue to find partners like that who want to work with us, who are in line with our values and see the mission that we have and want to help us get there. So I think that's the next step for us, is just finding those key partners. But in terms of addressing this from a league perspective, it's being clear, it's being intentional, it's being very, very obvious about what you want to do. If this is serious, if you seriously want to be an anti-racist league, if you seriously want to stamp out racism, then you're going to have to make unprecedented decisions. You're going to have to make unpopular decisions. And this is kind of the thing with anti-racism, with diversity work, is, especially in the sports setting, is as a sports club, you're marketing to the masses. You're marketing to everyone. You want everyone to be your fan. And the problem is that not everyone believes in this work. Not everyone cares about racism. Not everyone wants that. And so you see it all the time, that people keep politics out of sports. So it's hard for leagues to really make these decisions and make them stick and do this long term, because they're afraid to alienate people from their environments. And so as a business, you kind of have to make a decision. Is this what I want to do? And if so, you got to lean into it. You got to dive into it. You got to be consistent with it. And I just don't think that leagues are ready to be bold enough to make some of the decisions that they need to make. And some of it's not bold. Some of it's just consistency. Some of it's just, you look at the USL, they had some diversity training before that was mandatory, but it was 2-3 sessions at the beginning of the year in preseason, and beyond that there wasn't much after that. So, like, what is the consistent work that's being done year round that leagues and teams and players can do that'll start to impact the environments that are created on the field? I think that's a good first step, is figuring out what the language looks like to address anti-racism and to actually be anti-racist and move towards being an anti-racist league. And then what does that education look like? What is the continuing work that your clubs, your players, your league is going to do to address these situations and hopefully prevent them?
Well, Brandon, I thank you so much for coming on the show, man. Listeners, we will get back to the main show right after this break.
And we are back. So, Taylor, I think this is a good point where we should pick up on the quote-unquote blackest league in Europe. Ligue 1.
Oh, boy.
So, Ligue 1 is, I wouldn't say an interesting league, but they got I would say a decent statement. It said, in collaboration with clubs and expert partner associations, the LFP is organizing dedicated days to raise awareness among all football fans. Awareness raising workshops are conducted in youth academies, the partnership with Function to Football and others plan to raise awareness among all professional footballers. So, from this quote, and mind you, this came from 2020. I couldn't find anything updated.
That sounds about right.
Okay, so Ligue 1, which is probably, I'd probably say the least covered league out of the Big Five. Mm-hmm. It was also hard to find stuff to deal with racism. But you would think with a league that has probably the most number of black head coaches, the highest number of black footballers, probably outside of England, a lot of black representation in his national team. I'm kind of disappointed not to see more when it comes to terms of racial relations, but that goes back to our early point that we talked about earlier of like when you score your friends and when you play bad, you're something else.
Yeah, I mean, like Trevor Noah, when France wins the World Cup, he like went on the Daily Show and was celebrating like Africa won the World Cup, Africa won the World Cup.
Yeah, that's what I was calling it.
And then got like a very sternly worded response from I think the French ambassador to the United States about like how dare you disrespect France, like. We must give France all the credit for this. They are French. They are nothing else. And I think, paraphrasing Trevor Noah or summarizing him, I think his feeling was like, that's what you say when they win the World Cup. That isn't always what you say at other times. I think France is one that sort of gets maybe this is an outdated feeling, but I feel like France gets romanticized a lot, and Paris is beautiful and, you know, the City of Lights, and it's lovely. And I think there's plenty of institutionalized racism in France. It's illegal to wear, I think, a hijab into a public building. So, and like I think, therefore, there's women's players who can't play for the national team or have had issues on that front. There's plenty of institutionalized racism in France that I think maybe bleeds into Ligue 1 at times.
Yeah, it definitely does feel that way. Like you said, it's a league in a country that is romanticized because it's the city of love and it's this great wine country. Which, by the way, I want to go to France for that. But I think the thing that, I mean, even looking at like Zinedine Zidane. Like if Zinedine Zidane walked down the street and I had no idea who he was, that's a white man.
Yep.
But in France, and he even talked about it, about how like when I win the World Cup, I am French. But when I headbutt somebody, I am an Algerian whore. I'm all this kind of thing. And it's crazy. Like a guy of that great football ability be treated.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, as far as I understand, it's even little things like his accent gives him away as not being, you know, truly French or whatever it may be. I think he's from Marseille, but he might be from Paris. I forget.
Yeah. No, I think he is Marseille.
Yeah. I think there's like a lot of, you still have like isolated communities or very like insular communities, which is I think what tends to happen for minorities in countries where they don't always feel welcome. And so I think they just become those little identifiers that then people can always kind of separate you when they choose to, like when you headbutt somebody. Even though that was awesome and hilarious.
Yeah, it was.
Me, at least.
That was my true first ever footballing moment. Because I remember, like, I was in high school and I was sitting on the couch one day, and then Sports Center from across was like, Zinedine Zidane headbutt to play. And I was like, he did what?
Yes, he did.
Mind you, this is 13-year-old Elliot, like, oh, you can hit people? Bet. Went to soccer, tried to fight somebody. Coach was like, hey, you got to go. Can't do that, son.
That's not really what we try to do. But yeah, there is a little bit of that at times, man. Yeah, and that was, I forget he finally said, like, I think it was something about his sister or his mother that prompted that one. But it's kind of, he's one of my favorites. Like, Johan Cruyff is my favorite player. Zinedine Zidane is probably number 2 for many different reasons. But one of them is that just sort of like, I like a player who has those
anger issues?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. Like, the red mist, I guess. Like, Paul Scholes would do that occasionally where it's just like, oh, he's getting a red card. And Zidane definitely had those moments, too. I think it's changed, but for a while, he was one of only 2 players to get red carded in different World Cups. Yeah. He definitely had some anger issues, but I like the...
Hey, everyone. If you want to hear part 2 of this podcast, make sure you go on over to Soccer 101 and check it out there. Thanks for listening. Make sure to head over to Soccer 101 to hear part 2. Bye.